What happens when you have kids who have only learned to drive on an EV car? That's going to be really weird for them to get into a ICE vehicle. Like, I'd love to see them at a rental facility picking up a car and be like, "What? Why is this thing so laggy?" And all the things that we've become normal for us. That's going to be very bizarre, and it's going to be interesting to see how that pans out.
Welcome to EV Insider by Recurrent, where we make it easier to buy and sell electric cars by giving you access to leaders from across the industry. Let's get started.
My name is Joel Bassam. I'm the president of Eastern's Automotive Group. We are an independent group with 9 independent rooftops and 2 franchises, a Hyundai and a Nissan store.
We've been working together now for quite a while, actually. You guys, I feel like, are one of the leading lights for EV sales on the East Coast. That's sort of how I think of you. It's like certainly an early adopter and innovator. So tell me, like, how you initially decided I'm going to get into the EV business and go all in for it.
Yeah, I mean, I would say our journey into EVs was kind of like, I think most dealerships who are willing to try new things. We bought a few, we sold a few, we bought a few more, sold a few more. We didn't put a ton of additional effort into distinguishing the sales process from an ICE versus an EV versus a PEV. And the real kind of fuel to this thing was, since we already had some experience selling EVs, once the tax credit rolled into our lives, that really put a lot of fuel to this, no pun intended. And our growth really shot up from there, to the point at which, by the time the tax credit finished over that 18-month period, we had redeemed over $12 million in tax credit dollars for 3,000 customers. And so a ton of EV sales that I think increased adoption dramatically for us selling it and for customers considering that as a different type of vehicle. The biggest problem is customers haven't had one before. For us, most of our customers, especially the EV tax credit customers, were ones that hadn't considered that option and now would consider that option.
Yeah, I mean, you guys were selling, like, averaging 150, used EV tax cars a month, like, at least this year. Yeah. So how many of them, just ballpark, would you say, didn't come in looking for an EV but ended up getting one? Like, of that total,
Probably 90%.
90% of the people, hold on, I just want to make sure, 90% of the people that left with one of those used EV rebates didn't come in intending to buy an EV, but ended up going into one.
Yeah, I mean, this isn't a political statement, but I don't think that the government's a very good advertiser when it comes to the benefits of certain tax benefits. And so the real kind of strength of this particular program that, really nailed it as far as, like, getting the money into the economy and getting it into consumers' hands through dealers was the move of not making it something that came in the filing, but actually going through the process of applying it at the point of financing. And the most important thing still to this day, I don't care what anyone says, is how much is this car going to cost me a month, which includes, insurance and things like that. That is heavily impacted by that tax credit. And that's really where the EVs kind of bubbled up as this great option that they hadn't considered. And that the conversation then pivots to how this looks in your driveway and how that will fit into your lifestyle.
I've called this the suburban plug-in hybrid. Is
Sure.
A 2-car garage. One of them is a battery electric and one of them is a gas car.
Yeah.
And you basically just, you take the one that makes sense that day. And, the way most people drive, it's often going to be the EV.
I totally agree. I mean, and it's funny. Paul at Asoda will talk about this all the time of when you're teaching your kid how to drive, are you going to put them in the EV because it's just a different experience? I think the closest analogy I can think of in this space is that we deal with is a lot of times consumers will come in, especially if we happen to have an actual winter here in DC and Baltimore where it had snowed. Last year it snowed a lot. For the 2 years prior, it hadn't been snow once. But after that, I'm telling you, anecdotally, me search wise, you get customers saying, well, I definitely need at least one of my cars to be 4-wheel drive. And in this market, you're talking about 2 or 3 days a year, that really matters. And even in that instance, you're probably staying home with the kids anyway. You work remote. It's really not that big of a deal. It's going to get plowed. You don't live in rural Montana. It's not a big deal, right? But you could argue the same thing applies to range anxiety. People have this kind of fear of, oh man, I don't know if 300, I mean, that's what we're talking about nowadays. These modern EVs are 250, 300 miles of practical range. And that'll be negatively impacted by extreme weather conditions in the high end and low end. Again, not a majority of the year in most of the country. You're not driving 300 miles in a day and you have a charger at your house, even if it's a 120. It's not that complicated when it comes to actually practically thinking about it. But this is an emotional decision at the buying stage. And so that's the thing that we kind of sometimes have to overcome is really breaking it down and talking through their commute, using tools that are available, including yours, that show us how you can like track your commutes and say, oh, realistically, you actually are only driving 50 miles a day.
I do feel like, especially the used EV, the 3-year-old used EV next year, if the marketing is around like, what can you get for, like if you're looking at a 5-year-old Camry, or like, I don't know which way you do it, but like essentially what can you get for the same price over on the EV side? That feels like it's a even stronger argument for used next year than it is for new, like
I agree.
just it's so stark.
Yeah.
Lower miles, more tech, better, vehicle shape, like lower cost, monthly cost. And you're like, what do you do? Kind of thing.
Yeah, I agree with that wholeheartedly. I mean, I think that that will continue to just become more normal. And honestly, like the more normal it becomes, the faster the adoption curve. Like the more ionic eyes people see on the road, and the more people see a Ford Lightning and actually notice the subtle differences between that and a regular Ford F-150, the normality of that will become not a big deal, and then we can start talking about that kind of practicality approach, because that's where I think the larger conversation isn't around the practicality of these vehicles right now. It's all about rate anxiety and the cars are overpriced new and what are we going to do with the tax credit. And yes, that's all true, and I'd argue that's a little bit of noise, and it'll the market will flush it out, right?
Yeah.
Wait,
That's so key. I just want to repeat that back. So like we need to go, we are sort of like in the process of going from normality to the comparable, like what, okay, it's normal. Like, hey, here's two options. Like now that you can actually see that one's not scary and like evaluate them and just be like, oh, obviously that one's better, like on any measure,
correct.
So
Yeah, I mean,
that feels like really interesting.
and that's where the scariness of it, once that's the normality, that once that doesn't become scary, then there isn't actually a conversation to be had about that. And you can actually evaluate it on the non-emotional focus of car versus car, right? And so when that happens, and that does happen, and it will happen, all it does is make all the cars better, by the way. So like right now, Porsche just announced their new Cayenne EV, and it's got wireless charging. It's packed full of technology. I mean, it looks incredible. And then you look at that and look at the regular Cayenne now, and you're like, just put that interior in this one. Right? But they right now. So there's no reason for them to eat in their profit margin. Once those things become there's more parity between those two vehicles, then all of the vehicles become better, right? And so like the question will become, why doesn't this car have this, as opposed to, well, the EV one gets that because it's so much more expensive, and so like I still think there's some of these manufacturers are leaning into the EVs have to be luxury because they are so expensive to manufacture, they have to charge more. As that curve becomes more normal, and it really is now just a lifestyle decision of like, okay, you've got your Camry EV, you've got your Camry plug-in hybrid. Like they're kind of all about the same price. Maybe the plug-in hybrid's a little bit more because you get a little taste of best of both worlds. But this is really what it comes down to, and the trim levels become really more important than drivetrain. And right now, because of the manufacturing process, like the drivetrain is the kind of distinguisher between trim level. Like there is no base level of a Polestar. They're kind of all really nice. Because they have to be, because they have to justify the cost.
Okay, so there are a lot of things that we don't know about what's going to happen in 2026. So I'm not asking you to, prognosticate and predict the future and, anything like that. What are one or two things, that you feel like you can set your watch by? This is going to happen in the EV market next year.
I mean, we'll keep selling them. That's for darn sure. I think overall, I guess my point is what I would set my watch to is that these cars will be sold and there will be customer demand. And these cars are arguably better than ICE cars. And their only downside always has been they cost too much money. And that will continue to regulate. And that's the beauty of capitalism. Like the cars will meet where customer demands are, or customers won't buy them, right? And if customers don't buy them, then they'll have to adjust manufacturing, adjust incentives to reach the point where customers will buy them. And so that inherently will happen, and we'll just continue to see adoption. And as that adoption increases, retention increases, and customers are going to want to try the next best thing. And that next best thing will either have an ICE vehicle and an EV vehicle. I'd also say, I think there's going to be an interesting long-term trajectory. This is a 2026 question. Now I'm really
fair. No, yeah, hope for it.
what happens happens when, and this is something that, Paul and Asoto talks about all the time, but what happens when you have kids who have only learned to drive on an EV car? That's going to be really weird for them to get into a ICE vehicle. Like, I'd love to see them at a rental facility at a Hertz picking up a car and they're like, why is this thing so laggy? And all the things that we've become normal for us. That's going to be very bizarre, and it's going to be interesting to see how that pans out. But I mean, overall, it's still early days. That's the thing, is like, you just have to have such a long-term vision of this thing.
I was going to say, I have a 15-year-old who will be getting his learner's permit in 6 months. And to see him when we have to go and get gas at a rental car, before turning in a rental car or whatever, he's just like, what is that smell? And you're just like, this utter disgust, and you're like, you're definitely never driving one of these. Like, there's no way, like, let alone the laggy and the accelerator. It's like, getting it stand the smell of it.
Right. Yeah, totally. I mean, and then you just think about how that's going to continue to play out. I mean, I think that we've all realized that the concerns around not being able to maintain these cars is kind of not that big of an issue. But the cost of the maintenance thing is also a reaction to there being a lower percentage of cars. So, again, as a Hyundai dealership, right, you look at what the retail value is of these warranted battery replacements that we do at that dealership. And it's just, you look at it and you're like, on paper, this doesn't make any sense. Like, it cannot be this expensive. It can't be, a 5-digit battery repair that's being 100% covered by the manufacturer, which, again, kudos to the manufacturers that stand by those battery protections. That's why a lot of these cars have extended battery coverage. That long-term has to come down, and it will come down. And so, again, like, these are all the things that I think everyone kind of looks at this and like, why are we pushing this? Why are we pushing this? And it's, first off, I'd argue we're not really pushing it that hard. It's a small percentage of the net market. It's a niche technology, and that niche will continue to grow as parity comes down. And all of those things will become more regulated for aftermarket support when it comes to battery replacements, all the things that inherently will happen, just like they did for every other type of technology that's happened up to this point.
So you guys are probably, we've been at this long enough that you're getting some EVs on trade, I would imagine, right? Like, how do you decide, like, are there any differences with when you praise an EV versus an ICE on a trade? Like, what are the differences in how you do it?
Right now, not a whole lot of differences, but I mean, that's going to be something that we have to consider. I mean, I think, you guys are one of the companies that have really opened eyes to most consumers about the differences between evaluating, really the vehicle itself and what is of value. And really what matters on these cars is the battery health. So, figuring out how to properly diagnose that is something that we're still kind of all figuring out, and that will become a normal thing. But I would say right now we're kind of not there yet, but it's going to need to happen. So figuring out how to assess that is really the next phase of this. And that only matters if consumers agree, kind of. And I would say right now they don't, in the sense that you, practically speaking, we know that, a vehicle with 100,000 miles, but has been really, taken care of, been in the middle of the country and always charge at home with a phase 2, is worth more than a vehicle with 30,000 miles that was always, supercharged and was in Arizona its whole life. Like, we just know that. But the reality is, more miles, more bad. So that's still like the kind of rule of appraisal processes, and all of the mechanisms that we use to measure the vehicle value are still tied to that inherently. We need to detach that for these vehicles. But that has to be kind of agreed upon. It's just going to, again, that's kind of back to the key, I think, almost like the thesis of this whole thing. It's like, as they become more normal, these won't become that big of a deal. And so the question won't become how many miles. It's like, let's see what's the battery history and how's that work? And is the battery out of warranty? I mean, that's a big thing too.
Yeah, it does feel like there needs to be pull. It needs to be like pull through demand from shoppers, on the retail side. It's like, hey, that needs to matter to them, which I think it does already. People like know that they can look at the battery health in their iPhone. You just go to the menu and everything like that. And so there's interest there. Kind of where the industry has fallen down in general is the ability to actually answer that question the same way it is for an iPhone. And then once that happens, then it's like that then can flow through and make an appraisal different, right? So there's a 3-piece thing, of which step 1 is already in place. It feels like
Yeah,
the
I
demand
was
is there.
Yeah, I mean, and I think it matters a lot more for these cars because it's more impactful. Because the reality is, every ICE vehicle loses the same level of efficiency over time. I mean, not the same level, but similar levels of efficiency. A vehicle that, like, we own a bunch of vintage cars, and we always joke that, that car had 200 horsepower new. That was 60 years ago. A couple horses have escaped the stable, kind of thing. And it's the same thing with EVs. It's like, if the car's estimated range at new in the perfect conditions was 250 miles, even if it maintained the perfect conditions, it's not going to have 250 miles of max range anymore. Just like, to your point, an iPhone or any phone that you go and check the battery health. And so, but it matters more on an ICE vehicle. It would be the same thing. If this car was running perfectly, then its estimated mileage was, 30 miles a gallon, and its, tank size is X, therefore its range is Y. The reality is, it's not managing, it doesn't do 30 miles a gallon anymore. It hasn't in a long time. Time, wear, built up residue, all of the things that happen on a normal vehicle, and even horsepower degrades over time. So the reality is that car today is this. We have no way of measuring that in reality. And customers kind of understand that as a theory, but it doesn't practically impact their ownership in a way that means a lot. But on an EV vehicle, it does mean a lot.
Today, then, if you had the exact battery health percentage on a car at wholesale or at trade-in, it sounds like it would not actually impact your appraisal or what you pay for that car at this point, because step 2 isn't true yet. Is that fair?
I think that that's fair. I mean, but I think that should happen. I also think that there will be some truth as if that becomes more normal, and, like, in my Stockwave account or in whatever, platform I'm acquiring a vehicle, and that is one of the numbers that's most important to me because it impacts the sale. I mean, that's really what matters, is everything when I'm buying a car, the only thing that I'm thinking about is selling the car. And so any data and input into that, decision-making process has to be impactful at that end. And I'm not saying it's not. I'm saying right now it is not the most important thing. You still have all of the other key factors, relationship to book value, condition reports, and, things, and general market conditions are more important right now than the battery health of that specific vehicle, because there isn't an inherent value to a consumer, because there just isn't enough knowledge base there to know that when this one's an 80 and this one's a 96, this is what that practically means and how it impacts you. And, everyone kind of has to be in agreement. So the bank, the market, the consumer, the dealer, everyone kind of has to say, okay, this is worth less because of this.
Right. Let's say for next year, if you could, for some weird reason, hypothetical, you could only have one make, model, year of EV on your lot for your used sales, what would it be? Like, what's the one car you would stock if you could only stock one?
I mean, it has to be like a Tesla Model 3 or a Model Y. I mean, those are just the ones we sell the most of because there are the most of them. Tesla is that there was a while where Tesla was the term for an electric vehicle.
For me, it would be the used Hyundais. Like, my prediction, honestly, is, like, I think fast charging speed is going to get to be a bigger and bigger deal as people realize that it's not all equal. You don't just plug in the same, 2 different cars and the same charger and they both finish at the same time. Hyundai and Kia have put a ton into very, very fast charging speeds. And now that basically everybody has access to the Tesla superchargers, like, you're going to have this situation where, like, a Rivian pulls in or a Hyundai pulls in to a Tesla supercharger, like, arrives later and leaves sooner than a Tesla, like, because they charge faster, and there's a lot of factors there. There's, like, exactly how it's, like, how many electrons are can the vehicle take. It's also a matter of the efficiency of the car. So how many electrons does it take to go 100 miles of range? So there's a lot going into that, but that to me feels like a really undertold story that people don't quite realize.
That's true. I agree with you from the view of someone who lives in this industry, but I think for most consumers, they still don't comprehend what a kilowatt is. So, like, I don't think that's a more difficult story to tell, even though I agree with you that functionally that is kind of the answer to the practicality concerns that most people have, because if that becomes more normal and those are more available, then it really is, the idea of not being able to stop somewhere and fill up is not actually a real concern.
What's your dream EV that you can't wait, that isn't out yet, but is, like, kind of like you can't wait to drive?
I mean, I've never even seen a Rimac, but I would love to touch anything that guy does. I mean, I think he's a genius, and I love what he's doing with Bugatti. And outside of that, I mean, it's just that brand is so exciting because, again, it's if they can push the boundaries at that extreme level, for no good reason outside of just doing some nut stuff. That kind of technology is what flows through. Like, even you think of like some of the more extreme examples that Lamborghini was putting into like the Sian with the superconductors inside of the EV charger that only had, it had like 9 miles of range. It didn't actually serve any practical purpose, but I think they were the first manufacturers of superconductors in their, their hybrid assist inside of a transmission, and that kind of stuff is super interesting to me. Like even what Porsche's doing with their hybrid technology. Like it's for spooling up a turbo, but it's like a 9 horsepower turbo. Like that kind of stuff it's super interesting to me because you're leveraging technology to create efficiencies that will inherently trickle down to more normal models. And so what happens, I think, in that instance is displacement becomes smaller. If cars become more efficient, parity gets reached faster. And so like that is just the same reason that we have smartphones, because we sent someone to the moon. Like those kind of things are practically what matters to a normal consumer. It's hard to think about in the moment, but that's kind of how it flows. And, that's the same kind of thing here.
All right, to wrap this up, I've been sitting here grilling you with questions. So do you want to get me on record for anything you want to add them, please? Here's your chance.
I think overall, I mean, I think your position in the market is super interesting because, you're at the early stages of being at the forefront for, both consumer and dealer-based data for battery health. And how does that continue to evolve for you? Like, is it OEM partners? Is it wholesale partners? Is it inventory listing aggregator partners? Because you kind of need to be an answer to multiple shareholders. And that's that's kind of an interesting predicament to be in because you have lots of customers in that instance. And so I'm curious how that works for you guys and how that kind of expands.
Yeah, I mean, the true vehicle-specific battery health number, like it's a 93%, I can see that, like I can see on my iPhone, has been this like really interesting white whale that no one, including Recurrent, we've hung our hat around range and how range changes and how that changes different over time and different weather. But the equivalent of what you have in your iPhone, it's funny, for we and no one has been able to sort of bring that to market at scale because the data access has been really tough. The manufacturers have made it tough, frankly. I will say that there's some real interesting changes that are happening now. So a little bit under the radar, the ACC2, which was the California rules, that we're going to mandate the automakers to disclose that on the vehicle starting in the model year 2026. That all got nuked by the same federal action that took out the California waiver. So there's no longer a regulatory stick forcing that. For us, though, we're sitting there going like, hey, we have a pretty big carrot here, and the carrot is like better resale value, And so to the extent that OEMs can say, you know what, actually, there's not going to be a thing that forces everybody to do it, but the ones that go ahead and do more disclosure or make it possible for some vehicles, maybe it's like only off-lease vehicles because the leasing company can provide it, or maybe it's all vehicles because that automaker decides we're going to lean into transparency there, and because that's what the market wants. I think that is actually the dynamic, the next driver since the stick's not there. So that's something we're very, very involved in, and that's like a big thing we're going to be talking about next year is doing that on like a lot more cars than we have today, and having that as a distinct concept from how far can this car go, what's the range, because they are really quite different. There's like all kinds of buffer areas of the battery, and so many things affect driving range, and so that it's keep an eye out on this in this space for announcements there in the early part of the year.
Oh, well, right. we love it.
Thanks, Joel. It's been great working with you guys over the years now. So yeah, and thanks for taking the time for this call.
Thanks for joining this episode of EV Insider. Be sure to like, comment, and subscribe, and we will see you next time.